this webinar, which is about social enterprise policy across devolved nations. We have a galaxy of speakers. We have Stuart Dickinson, MLA, who is chair of the APPG on social enterprise and sponsor of the Private Members Bill on social value legislation. We have Luke Fletcher, MS, chair of the Cooperative and Mutuals. Patrick Hurley here in Westminster, who is chair of our APPG on social cooperatives and community economy. We have Colin Jess, who is social enterprise Northern Ireland. We have Duncan Thorpe, because unfortunately Kim Wallace is unwell, from Social Enterprise Scotland. We have Bethan Webber from Wales. And we have Andrew Croft from Social Enterprise UK. So the plan is that we're going to have a few minutes from each of the different nations who are going to talk about the social enterprise policy that they are dealing with, and that what is happening, and then I think the plan is that we will then be able to take questions probably sometime around 1:30, 1:45. So we've got quite a lot to get through this afternoon. And I really want to welcome all of you who are here. So I think the first person I need to call is Luke Fletcher, who is going chair of CPG for Co-ops and Mutuals, which is Welsh Government's policy support to social enterprises over the last few years. And of course, well-being of future generations legislation has been important in this. I was dealing with our colleagues in Wales when I was director of the Young Foundation, so I know that they've been doing some very, very good work in Wales. So over to you, Luke.
So I'm very much not Luke Fletcher, but he's
right. I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay. Luke's just emailed. He's at a report launch this morning, which is slightly overrunning. I think he's
No. I'm sorry,
here about
Dan.
1:45. So if we go to the next speaker, maybe then we circle back to Luke
All right.
afterwards.
Okay. Well, that's Patrick, and he's always ready to speak. So Patrick, over to you.
Thank you, Glenys. Yeah, give me one moment while I just get some papers up on my screen then, because obviously you've caught me slightly unaware.
I'm sorry about that.
Give me a moment. Okay, yeah, here we go.
Are you off?
So
Yeah,
yeah,
you ready?
I am indeed. So I am the chair of the Westminster All-Party Parliamentary Group for the social enterprise movement, the cooperative and economy in addition. It's important to note at the start off, I'm not a member of the government, and I don't speak for the government on social enterprise and community business issues. So I'm intending to give what I would consider to be an honest but critical friend assessment of Westminster government approach to the sector. There have been some positives. There've been some more of a kind of, let's say, a mixed bag in terms of the involvement and the engagement with social enterprise. So I'll start with the positives. Manifesto commitment in July of last year to double the size of the mutuals sector, and a commitment within the manifesto to grow diverse business models and to ensure that the structure of businesses for the next 10 to 15 years is up to the task of dealing with how the economy is expected and may well change up to the 2030s, 2040s. How the government is measuring doubling the size of co-ops and mutuals is still open to question. The number of co-ops, perhaps, or the number of members of co-ops, or the percentage of the economy which is by some metric cooperatively owned. It wouldn't surprise me if by the time of the next election, that whichever metric is most favourable to government being able to say that they've doubled the size of the sector is the metric that they choose. But nonetheless, that still is going to be a massive improvement on where we were up until 2024. Second thing I'll point out is we've got the new Office for the Impact Economy, and that's been recently announced and that's been set up. And the intention there is that rather than having this kind of hodgepodge and patchwork quilt approach for impact and mission-driven businesses, there's going to be within government a single front door, and that's to accommodate impact investors, philanthropists, the purpose-driven businesses that we're all well aware of and that we've worked with. I'm sure every single one of us on this call has done over many years. And the reason for that single front door is to partner with the government and to be able to more effectively grow and more efficiently grow the social impact that those organisations are trying to undertake across the UK. We've also got plans recently announced for a new cooperative development unit as a way of supporting the co-op sector to grow and to become more efficient and to be able to compete more effectively on a level playing field with other types of businesses. And that's going to be sat within the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. There's historically been this kind of tripartite system between MHC, LG, DCMS, Culture, Media and Sport, and Department of Business and Trade, and nobody quite knows who to approach when it comes to advocating and campaigning on behalf of the sector. So I'm hoping that the Impact Economy Office and the Cooperative Development Unit will give some clarity to how the sector, how the movement can interact with Westminster government over the coming years. On the issues where there's perhaps slightly more mixed bag in terms of tangible progress on what's been going on since the election in July last year, over the last 17 months or so. So we've got a call for evidence on co-ops and mutuals, but that's literally only just been issued over the last week or so since the budget. That's been set up, and there's a call for evidence which is ongoing and which will then feed into policy making over the course of 2026. But candidly, it's only just got going after 17 months, and it's government ministers are dragging their feet on this to a degree which gives insufficient confidence for myself that we're going to make the headway that we need to. In the budget last week, so 5-6 days ago, there was actually a measure which was put within the budget documents to reduce incentives to create employee ownership models. This only came to light to me yesterday, and I've had a discussion with one of my colleagues down here this morning to see what I can do and what we can do collectively to amend that. But I think that the last thing we need to be doing is reducing incentives to create employee ownership. We need to actually be increasing those incentives. Another issue maybe is a kind of a historic legacy concern within Department of Culture, Media and Sport. They have a lot that they deal with, and the way that they approach their interactions and engagements within the sector and the social impact kind of ecosystem more generally tends to be quite narrow. They don't tend to take the broad approach that would be most beneficial, and I think that possibly needs to change. But like I say, maybe the new Office for Impact Economy and maybe working with the co-op development units, that might impact on some of their decisions and the historical legacy approach. There's potential within one of the government's flagship key programs, which is called Pride in Place, and this is a multi-million pounds program of investment and support specifically on those uber local communities, the very small super output areas that have got long-standing financial exclusion issues and issues relating to multiple deprivation. And there's a lot of potential there for social enterprises to get involved and to play a role in developing pride in place, to developing what services look like on that very localized model. But I think that from a structural perspective, that opportunity is limited to disseminating out the information and asking social enterprises in those areas to themselves have the the kind of the wherewithal to get involved, because there are dozens and dozens and dozens of these Pride in Place programs and areas across the country. They've all got their separate boards, they've all got their separate decision-making processes and procedures. And I think that there's no alternative and there's no better way of getting social enterprises involved than in doing so locally and building up those very local connections and relationships. There's a limited opportunity, I think, for the national bodies to get involved there. One last thing I'll mention is social enterprise was only mentioned briefly in the NHS's 10-year plan. And as I'm sure we all know on this call, there's health industry and health sector social enterprises. The list is as long as your arm that could be involved here, and that the NHS more generally could take advantage of. There's a whole ecosystem that's been built up over 15, 20 years of external provision, primary care services, all the way down to, therapeutic interventions. And I think it's a trick that the Department of Health and Social Care is missing by not giving sufficient weight to the social enterprise opportunities there. I shall stop. And over to your next speaker, Glenys.
Thank you very much indeed, Patrick. I think we do have a bit of a job, as Patrick has said, and both he and I at the opposite ends of Parliament are going to be raising these issues. We've got a debate in the House of Lords on Thursday, which I'm down to speak in, and I will be talking about cooperative social enterprise and the issues, and asking questions of the government about how we move things forward. Right, we now revert back. Luke is with us. Welcome. And I'm going to ask Luke to talk to us about the Welsh Government policy to support social enterprises over the past few years, particularly the Wellbeing of Future Generations legislation, which I've always thought was one of the most radical and far-reaching and interesting pieces of legislation for a long time. Over to you, Luke.
No, great. Thank you all for the opportunity to speak to you today. And apologies for my late arrival. I was chairing a session of the cross-party group on industrial communities where we launched actually this report here, Next Step for the Valleys, produced by Industrial Communities Alliance Wales. A lot of really good stuff in there. Couldn't recommend it enough for those on this call to take a look at it as well. I think it speaks to a lot of what we have spoken about over our time in this particular sector and our interest in the sector. But as you mentioned, I'll briefly give an overview of where we are in Wales with social enterprises, the contributions they make, how they've been supported, and what more we need to do if we're serious actually about scaling them up and maximising their potential. Social enterprises and community-led ventures have become central to the fabric of Welsh life. I think it's very fair to say that. They offer a direct response to that economic and cultural peripheralisation that many of our communities have experienced over the years, and they present, I think, a fundamentally different model of economic development, the deeply extractive framework within which the Welsh economy has had a lot of experience in over the years. One that keeps that wealth local, strengthens our sense of place, and turns those sort of extractive industries on the head is something to be welcome. What we tend to see time and time again is that these organisations don't simply operate in communities, they are of those communities. And that's something as to one of the reasons why they become so successful, why there's so much buy-in locally. The most recent social business mapping report from 2025 shows just how strong and resilient the sector has become. We know that we now have more than 3,100 social businesses operating in Wales. That's a 13% increase since 2022. They represent nearly 3% of all Welsh businesses, and together they employ somewhere between 57,000 and 68,000 people, supported by around 60,000 volunteers. So their combined annual turnover between 3.5 and 5.7 billion pounds is wealth that is anchored then within Welsh communities rather than extracted from them. The values then that underpin these organisations shine through, I think, in that data. 93% reinvest their surpluses back into the business or community, up from 90% just a couple of years ago. Almost half direct their profits specifically to community on environmental benefit, and 84% now pay the real living wage, far higher than the private sector average. I think what this tells us actually is that social enterprises in Wales are a high quality employer. They pay fairly, they hire locally, and their leadership reflects the diversity and experience of the communities they then serve. I think it is worth emphasising the extraordinary resilience the sector has shown over the years. Despite the immense pressures that we all know of from COVID-19, 91% of social businesses that were operating in 2022 were still trading in 2025. I think that's a remarkable achievement. And importantly, I think the sector thrives most strongly in our most deprived areas where the need and the impact is at its greatest. Social enterprises are active across every major policy domain. They're active in health and care, green energy, food, housing, culture, and education. They show us in practical, real grounded terms what an innovative, inclusive and sustainable economy actually looks like. I think we are we fall into the trap very often as politicians to talk a lot about these terms, but then on very rare occasions are able to point to where those things are in action. But here we have that example in action. So in Wales we have a concept called cymunedoli, which means communitisation, reflecting the idea that communities themselves shape, control and deliver the solutions to local needs. We see it across the country in a rich landscape actually of social enterprise networks like yr Orsaf in Penygroes, Gallery in Caernarfon, Cwmni Bro Ffestiniog, and Partneriaeth Ogwen, as well as enterprises operating in sectors from healthcare and hospitality to transport, renewable energy and community-owned pubs. And these are really powerful examples of what happens when communities are trusted and supported to take ownership of their future. It's something I'm particularly proud of as the cross-party group chair, to be able to talk about those organisations and to regularly engage with those organisations as well. Welsh Government support for the sector has tended to come through a variety of channels and organisations. So like Compass, and I can see Beth Ann is here with us today, will receive that core funding from government, and they've been central to really pushing the agenda on this. Compass provide not only business support to cooperatives and social enterprises, but also the data and analysis that give us such a clear picture of the sector today. Their international insights, including work with experts from places like the Basque Country, have been really invaluable. But in my view, and in the view of many within the sector, social enterprises have not been as well supported by Welsh Government policy approaches more broadly. I think too often they have emerged in response to local needs created by market failure, or I think it's fair to say by the relative absence of state intervention. The social economy in parts of Wales has been defined by self-reliance, by bottom-up creativity, and by a democratic communitarian ethos. And there has been some support. I think we need to be clear about that. So, for example, through the Development Bank of Wales for small renewable energy projects and in aspects of the foundational economy agenda, these interventions have been, I think it's fair to say, piecemeal rather than long-term strategic. What I think we've lacked more than anything else is that long-term strategic view and a long-term strategic push from government, although it does seem to me that it's starting to develop now. The Auditor General for Wales highlighted this gap quite clearly in a 2022 report, which pointed really to an inconsistency or inconsistent engagement from local authorities. So procurement, for an example, is widely recognised as a major area of potential growth for social enterprises, but the systems and policy frameworks then needed to enable that growth remain really underdeveloped. And I think this is why working closely with Compass is so important. And when we look at what the sector is already contributing, it becomes really exciting then to imagine what it could do with a bold vision and a sustained long-term strategy and long-term support. Compass have set out a strong series of asks for the next Welsh Government, really a provocation to be more ambitious, a real challenge to that next Welsh Government. So, for example, they call for strengthened specialist business support, proactive market development, accessible and appropriate funding, a deeper commitment to community wealth building and procurement, legislation and support that empower community ownership, and a far greater focus on social entrepreneurship education. These calls for action are reinforced by what we hear from one of our think tanks here in Wales, the Institute of Welsh Affairs, and many others, that communities in Wales remain among the least empowered in Britain when it comes to growing community-led and socially driven enterprises. There is near unanimous agreement among practitioners, think tanks and politicians that Wales needs to become an enabling and enact an enabling legislative framework for community rights. It's something that we've been discussing for more than a decade now, and yet it has still not come to pass. I found it really disheartening to be in the chamber and hear a response from the relevant cabinet secretary saying that there was going to be another consultation. At what point do we say, right, enough of the consultations, let's just crack on with this? It's an incredibly frustrating position to be in. In a way, though, it's energizing, because I think the opportunity is really clear. You know, if we were really were to fully embed support for the solidarity economy into the core of Welsh Government policy making, we could make social enterprises in Wales a real driver, real economic engines. Yes. I'm conscious of time, so I'll end there. But I hope this has given a useful overview of both the strengths of the sector and the challenges ahead. So diolch yn fawr. Thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you. And what you just said about the frustration, I must say my heart sank when I learned that that the government were going to have some research into how to double the cooperative sector. My goodness, what research do we need to have? We know how to do this. So it does sort of drive you slightly mad. Stuart, we're moving on to you now to talk about the Northern Ireland Irish Government policy support for social enterprise over the last few years, and also telling us what's going on with the upcoming social value legislation. So welcome, and over to you, Stuart.
Thank you very much, and apologies for not being able to join you for the whole of this session. I'm delighted to join you now from Belfast. It's been one of those busy days, because as we approach the Christmas break here at Stormont, everything seems to be happening at once. The house is very busy today. I've already been on a Zoom to Bosnia Herzegovina at 8 o'clock this morning. I was speaking in the house. I've just done a school visit, and I'm back up to speak to you now, and then I have questions in the house later on. Anyway, just to concentrate on where we're at. Okay, I chair the Northern Ireland Assembly all-party group on social enterprise, which Colin Jess, who's on the call, is the Chief Executive of Social Enterprise NI. Through that involvement, we have had lengthy discussions, not only in this mandate, but actually in the previous mandate of the Assembly, as to how we should deliver social value legislation for Northern Ireland. And previously, I had proposed a private member's bill. However, time and politics in Northern Ireland didn't allow that to happen, even though the Minister at the time, Conor Murphy, indicated that he was A, supportive, and B, if he had had time as Minister, he would have introduced legislation by the department. However, the wheels fell off that, the Assembly went down. We're now back up again in a much shortened mandate, and I had the work that was previously done ready to run again to deliver a private member's bill. In the meantime, well, just to set the scene in Northern Ireland, currently we don't have, or we didn't have until 2025, earlier this year, any real social value legislation in Northern Ireland. Social value in Northern Ireland was effectively embedded through guidance rather than statute with the Department of Finance's procurement policy notices, which set out how procurement should be done and how social value would be embedded in that. But of course, that only applies to central government procurement, and it doesn't, for example, cover local government, although various local government and other arm's length bodies like our universities and others do dabble around the edges of social value when it comes to procurement. But then what happened next was the UK government brought forward a Procurement Act in 2023, and because there was no assembly and because we were under direct rule, bits of that then applied to us. So we ended up in a situation where we had the cart before the horse. We had no basic social value legislation on the books here, but then we had cherry-picked bits of legislation that came from Westminster, truthfully not very helpful and not very useful to us. And that included things like a national procurement policy statement. But how do you implement that if you don't have the basics in place, first of all? So my piece of legislation, the original private member's bill, was to encompass the whole of social value, including the stuff that was covered in the UK government's Procurement Act of 2023. So it was sort of kind of back to the drawing board. But what we've done now is that in the proposed legislation, which I can say has just gone to the Speaker's office for approval, and I think reading between the lines, it's likely to get approval to move to the drafting stage. What we're saying is we've distilled this down, following our consultation and research, we've distilled this down to two clear areas. One, a legal duty on public bodies who procure to have regard to social value throughout the full commissioning and procurement cycle. And secondly, a legal duty on the relevant department to support the implementation through the provision of guidance, training and practical tools to ensure that all public bodies are equipped to deliver on these duties. Not much point in having legislation if the civil servants and public servants who have to deliver it don't have the technical resources and skills and the knowledge required to deliver that, and they need to have an understanding. I hope that some of that training and guidance will be delivered by organisations like Social Enterprise NI. So the updated proposals that I'm bringing forward don't seek to replicate existing policy, nor indeed to introduce rigidly, overtly technical scoring rules. Instead, they aim to embed a clear ethos across all public spending decisions, creating a legal foundation for social value to be consistently considered, to be meaningful and proportionate to the context of the project. And by anchoring this principle in law, I hope that the bill will fulfil a long-standing legislative gap in Northern Ireland and support a culture where social value isn't just encouraged, but where it's expected. So that's really where we are. Thank you for that. I'm happy to answer any questions.
You're on mute,
Sorry, I'm having problems. I was just having problems unmuting myself. Sorry about that, guys. Thank you very much indeed, Stuart. I just wondered, I've been sort of, as some of you will know, I've been involved with dealing with social enterprise and promoting social enterprise for, I don't know, nearly 30 years. Before I became a member of the House of Lords in 1998, and I was already involved with social enterprise, what was Social Enterprise London. So I just was reflecting on the contributions we've had so far and the ones that we have coming up. Because in a few minutes, what we're looking for with our roundtable, with the people we have here, with Colin and Duncan and Bethan and Andrew, who are going to give us a few minutes on the best practice of social enterprise policy in their nation. But just to sort of, this is a journey that we've all been on. And one of the things that we were looking at, in 1997, we had the new Labour government, was actually how did we get anybody to even recognise the word social enterprise? People knew what cooperatives were, but they were mostly, they thought of them as the shops. And I've been a member of the co-op since I was 16 years old, so I'm Labour and co-op. So what's happened over the last 25 years has actually been really a very, I think, rather successful journey. But what's been very interesting has been watching how different the journey has been in the different countries. Because I've been up in Scotland, I've spent quite a bit of time in Northern Ireland when I was director of the Young Foundation, because we were doing quite a lot of work, and with colleagues in Wales. So and each country has been doing this in a slightly different way, and sometimes leapfrogging each other. So I've got a feeling that our colleagues in Northern Ireland might be about to leapfrog us on the social value issue. And that is important because, of course, we are looking at procurement. This new government is looking at procurement. Georgia Gould, before she was moved from the Cabinet Office, had been taking some quite radical steps to make sure that we had a playing field that was level for social enterprise and cooperatives and mutuals to be able to deliver public services. So it just my observation so far from the contributions we've had is that we have a job of work to do, which is about how we learn from each other, which is what this is about, and how we also make sure that we're using the information that we get from each other about what we're doing to push the government that we are trying to push along the lines of having a coordinated strategy. I mean, I think that's so far everybody's mentioned either piecemeal or something like piecemeal and the need for a strategy. So that we need to hold, because that clearly is the case. So what we're going to do now is move on to 2 minutes or so from each of the sector representatives on the headline of the best practice of social enterprise policy in their nation. So I don't know if we got Colin with us. Or
Yes.
am I? Yes, Colin.
Yes, you have.
Okay, so you're first, Colin. Is that okay? Can I call on you to say
Absolutely.
answering that question? And then what we're going to do is move on to take contributions and have a conversation, we hope, with the people who are the 60 odd people who are listening and joining in with this webinar. So Colin, over to you.
Okay, thanks very much, Glenys. And suppose first of all, to set the scene in Northern Ireland, Social Enterprise Northern Ireland has managed the Social Economy Work Programme since 2012 on behalf of the Department for the Economy and its various iterations. It's something we're pleased to be part of because it's recognised that social enterprise are part of the economy, and we have fought very hard to remain within Department for Economy as opposed to moving across to the likes of communities. There's a game changer for us. As Stuart has already mentioned, we have struggled through times of 3 years and 2 years without a sitting assembly, but at all times we have continued to lobby and work for the sector through the all-party group that Stuart has mentioned. In February 2004, whenever the assembly returned, there was a change of party at the top of the Department for Economy, and that was Sinn Féin took over Department for Economy from the DUP. And Sinn Féin, through the ministerial level, have been very, very supportive of the social economy in Northern Ireland. And in fact, since 2012, we had got a very limited amount of support through to manage the work programme. It didn't increase any time between 2012 and 2024, but with a new outlook and a new minister in place and a new party, we received additional support to run the programme, which was obviously delighted to have that. Last year, on the 4th of December, later on, so 7 months after coming into the position, the Minister launched a social enterprise action plan with 14 actions in it. They then set out a social enterprise co-design group, which Senni's at the heart of, alongside several other leaders in the sector, to try to develop policy to run alongside the work programme. And then there's the Social Economy Policy Group in Northern Ireland, which is represented from each of the government departments, which we sit on as well, to try to look at how government departments can support the social economy. Then within the councils, they've actually appointed social enterprise champions. So every council in Northern Ireland has a champion appointed who is running, who is knowledgeable about social enterprise, including the likes of Invest NI and Intertrade Ireland. So So it's what I'm trying to, and also recently there's been an awful lot of focus on community wealth building and great support and actually financial support provided for the community wealth building. So I suppose the sort of picture I'm trying to develop here is that the Department for Economy and the Minister for Economy is very, very supportive of what we're doing as an organisation. It's very supportive of the sector. And I'd just like to pay tribute to Stuart for the work that Stuart has done in driving his piece of the social value legislation. That was actually, I think from memory, Stuart, in 2017 when one of the previous ministers of finance agreed through procurement board to take forward private social value legislation on behalf of the minister. But about a week later, the Stormont Assembly collapsed. And I always wonder, where would we be now if that hadn't happened?
Yes.
And legislation would be on the statute books. And I know you were involved, Glynis, going back at those days with the likes of Chris White as well.
I was indeed.
So yeah, that probably rings and probably comes back to you a wee bit. But there is great support from ministers. The officials would be is a different level as well, which we try to work with. But certainly at the top level, huge support in Northern Ireland from the Minister for the Economy.
I mean, I look at that with envy because, we started in 2001, 2002 with social enterprise in the department, what was then the Department of Trade and Industry, and ended up, and still are, in DCMS, Department of Media, Sports and the voluntary sector. That they still hold the responsibility in England for social enterprises, and it's been some of us have been beating that drum for a very long time to say, why on earth are we there? Why aren't we? Their cooperatives are regulated by the Treasury, and so are mutuals, and social enterprises are regulated, if you're being regulated, by the DCMS. So this is not sensible. That's just my comment on. I'm sure Andrew will have other things to say. Can we move on now to Duncan, who's going to talk to us about I'm particularly interested to hear what's happening now in Scotland, since it's about 2 or 3 years since I was up there and talking to people about the world of social enterprise. So over to you, Duncan.
Yeah, all good. And just to say, as has been mentioned, Kim Wallace is unwell today, so she sends her apologies. And also our MSP co-conveners send their apologies as well. They're all caught up with parliamentary business, which is something we're all used to, I think. So just to start with that. So just to give a bit of context, really, I suppose, about some of the key stats around social enterprise in Scotland. So firstly, there's around 6,000. They provide around 90,000 jobs, and economic contributions quite significant as well. It's 2.89 billion GVA. That was according to the last census, which was published just quite recently. And I think it's fair to say as well, Scotland is a good place for social enterprise development. I think our direction of travel is pretty good in many ways. And the sector is well supported by government and also political parties as well in general. I think that's fair to say. I think it is important to learn from other parts of the UK. Obviously, that's what this is all about today. And I think, as has been mentioned, the Welsh Future Generations Commissioner is a really good example of that, where in Scotland we do have some legislation around this as well. So potentially there's going to be a Future Generations Commissioner for Scotland as well. So I just thought I'd run through, I suppose, a few of the key policy areas, because a lot has been happening, kind of thing, as I think has already been mentioned as well. So I've got some notes here because I don't want to forget anything. But in terms of the social enterprise movement itself, the social enterprise community, there has been a 10-year social enterprise strategy, which comes to a conclusion in 2026. And that has had, I think it's 3 practical action plans attached to that as well to really drive forward that strategy. So that's been very successful in many ways. And that also includes our specialist support service as well, called Just Enterprise, which is specialist support for the enterprise and third sector, i.e. social enterprises. So that's been a big investment, I think, by Scottish Government as well. So that's a really significant part of the overarching environment in Scotland. Other areas I would include are the Public Service Reform Strategy, which was recently published. That basically says business as usual in terms of public services is not an option. And for us, of course, it's a case of, what else can we do in terms of public service delivery by social enterprises and other models as well. There was a strategy called the National Strategy for Economic Transformation, NSET, and as part of that, there was a commitment, I always get the number wrong, it's Action 44, I think, to basically drive forward the number of social enterprises, cooperatives, and employee-owned businesses specifically as a collective. The phrase IDBM has been kind of created as part of that, which is inclusive democratic business models. And that's kind of where we're at the moment in terms of that direction of travel. So it's social enterprise cooperatives, employee-owned businesses, development trusts, and other similar organizations. And one of the key commitments as part of that, I suppose, is tripling the number of these IDBM models in Scotland, which is a very significant target as part of that report, which was published fairly recently. And there's a couple of groups around that as well. So the IDBM Alliance, which is formed of Social Enterprise Scotland and partners, and also the Scottish Government's Economic Democracy Group as well, talking about the kind of oversight of that report. So that's I think the target is within 10 years we'll triple the numbers. So we'll see how that goes. A couple of other areas as well which have a direct impact on social enterprise, community wealth building, which has been mentioned already. There is legislation in the Scottish Parliament just now seeking to create a Community Wealth Building Act. So that's the stage one at the moment, early stages. And obviously a lot of people will be familiar with this, the 5 pillars of community wealth building. One certainly includes development of these IDBM business models, and that's obviously one of our big focuses as part of that legislation. And finally, fair work as well. So there is a big, I suppose, drive towards fair work in Scotland, and that's employee voice, payment of the real living wage, these kind of things. And we are ahead, I think, in terms of the payment of the real living wage, for example, and particularly in the social enterprise community in Scotland. There's a very high level of organisations pay the real living wage. There is a Fair Work Convention as well, which is a civic society body, as well as the Fair Work team within the Scottish Government as well. So there's a big drive towards that. And I suppose one of the interesting parts of that as well is procurement reform as well. So there is something called Fair Work First, which is putting conditionality on public contracts to make sure that they're fulfilling, various social aspects as well. And that's being developed and reviewed at the moment. So that's just a few of those policy areas directly of impact on social enterprise. There's obviously a lot there as well. And just finally, just in terms of a couple of other things, we are thinking more about investment innovation, I would say funding innovation as well, and kind of getting beyond the usual debates around that. Tax reform as well. I mean, there's a lot around devolved taxes, which we don't do much about, and also urban land reform. So we've just passed a Land Reform Act, the latest in a series, which is focused on broadly speaking, rural land reform, but we need to kind of drive that forward a bit more. And again, final point, it's all towards building a well-being economy. I think that's really, really what we're all talking about here as well. But just sorry, final point would be practical policy implementation. So I feel like, in every part of the UK, there's a lot in terms of legislation, really good legislation, really well-informed legislation, but it's a case of what happens to that legislation in the real world in terms of that implementation. I guess we'll come to this as part of the discussion, but it's just a really important point. You can have great legislation, but it's how does that really translate into real world practice?
Oh my goodness, Duncan, you're absolutely right. And it just feels like we're kind of playing major catch up in England because of the governments we've had for the last, it has been a real effort to keep social enterprise and on the agenda at all. And that the fact that we managed to do that in the days when the government wasn't always as sympathetic as we would want it to be, is partly down to some of the work of Social Enterprise UK, no doubt about it at all. So Bethan Webber from Compass, where are you? Oh, you're there, yes. Hello, welcome.
Thank you.
Over to you.
Thanks very much. So it's great to be here, great to hear what's happening elsewhere in the UK. And I think just building on what Luke covered, many of the points that are most relevant here in Wales, I think it's fair to say we've had a lot of commitment to sort of social enterprise and co-op economy for a long time. Our government here has invested heavily invested, I guess heavily is a subjective concept. And the legislative framework is strong here, I think, for a sort of social enterprise and a community-owned kind of economy. We by way of context, we in Compass work with a number of partners on the Social Business Wales, which is the generic sort of backbone national programme of social enterprise support. We have a vision and action plan with a number of asks in it that has been in existence for 5 years. We've just refreshed it actually. Within Compass, we also deliver a range of other more targeted programmes. So we have a community-based sort of pre-start programme, Perthyn, which works in Welsh language communities where there's a high density of second homes. We work with community groups there with small grant funding to kind of just take ideas from an idea to action. So we work with groups on taking ownership of assets to setting up housing ideas to a whole range of things, and that often feeds into then some of our other programs. We have more targeted programs then around community owned housing. We've got some work going on in care. We're supporting the transition of private providers in children's residential care to the eliminating profit model, so helping support the transition under that legislation, and young entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs program, social leadership program, and others. And we host, or we provide the secretariat, I should say, for the cross-party group here in Wales. So we work closely with Luke and other supporters in Wales. The legislative framework is strong here. The Future Generations Act, puts 5 ways of working at the heart, which includes our sector and others. We have other acts. The Social Services and Wellbeing Act is similar. The Social Partnerships Act, which has a focus on social partnership, fair work and procurement. And the Health and Social Care Act, which has the eliminating profit from care as at the heart of it as well. However, and the investment I've outlined, we're lucky to get a range of different Welsh Government largely funded programmes, and we've had some SPF funding, can't remember the acronym now, as well, that's been able to go deeper in some parts of Wales and in some local authority areas, notwithstanding the challenges of its short-term nature and semi-fragmented approach. Having said all that, there is an implementation gap around the legislation. We've had the investment, the mapping shows some really positive progress. Luke alluded to that and quoted some of the stats, and we're really pleased to see that our sector here is cautiously optimistic and forecasting growth despite all of the global challenges in the context we're in. And we know that's not echoed everywhere in the UK. So it shows for us the return on the investment that's been made through the national programmes here and the need for it. However, people are still struggling with poverty and still living with less than ideal outcomes, less than basic outcomes in some contexts. So what we do see, I think, is an implementation gap. The legislation is designed to shift the ways of working, shift the power dynamics around where investment goes, to bring more of our sector and the communities we represent and the people within those communities into the decision-making places. And that hasn't happened in 10 years of the Future Gens Act. So I think strengthened accountability is a really important stage for us in Wales next. It's what Luke was talking about, I think, in terms of this sector is not necessarily embedded fully in the implementation of a range of other investment and priorities across Wales, from local growth deals to local authority planning to community owned energy, renewable energy, food, housing, I go on. So I think we have had real positive trajectory with our employee ownership. We had a specific target and investment, and we've seen that really build momentum. So the investment is key. The legislative framework is there. The opportunity to go further is really exciting, but it does take, I think, now that wider embedding of the sector as almost, I think, a community ownership and wealth building first approach would see us take it to the next level. And Luke mentioned Cymunedoli, the sort of communitisation of the economy, which is really gathering momentum from the ground across different parts of Wales. And that has been a 25-year plus journey for some of those entities. And that it's really powerful to see, with the investment and support of agencies like ourselves, not just Compass, but many others, and investment over time, European and government and others, it's now really starting to flourish. And there are parts of Wales where the community is in ownership of that local wealth and assets and services. And that's really powerful to see and build on.
That is very, very good. That's smashing. Thank you. Andrew, straight over to you. You ready?
Yes, thank you very much, Glynis.
Thank you, Bethan.
Yes, sorry. So I think probably if we go back to the Social Value Act, which came into force in January of 2013, I think that was probably quite a pivotal moment for us. We co-wrote that with the backbencher Chris White from the Conservative Party, and that brought into legislation the requirement for social clauses within public procurement. And to take account of that, we've continued to keep pushing for social clauses, for a much more level playing field, for social enterprise to be able to play a bigger role in public purse expenditure and delivery, where clearly there are also other additional items with organisations rooted in their communities and returning their surpluses to do more, to do better, to R&D, where perhaps that wouldn't be the case with private businesses. So we continue to work with the Crown representative and through the work of Cabinet Office, we are seeing more and more the rise of public procurement requirement. So that's been, I would say, a positive for us. We were also lobbying hard for social investment. So one of our key pillars is resource for social enterprise as well as promotion. And we were able to get the establishment of big society capital as it was, better society capital as it is now under a rebrand. And we've continued to push to try and maximize the flow of capital to social enterprises, where I think that lion's share perhaps could quite easily be swallowed up by impact organizations which may have a more commercial first aspect to them. So we continue with that. We ran the Secretariat for the Adewale Commissions 1 and 2, which were I suppose a critique of what we'd helped to create and ways in which we might be able to improve them, particularly I think in terms of getting capital into racialized communities and those that had typically been marginalized from investment because they don't look like perhaps the people that are actually making the investments. So that's been a real push for us to try and create those changes. I think one of the other wins we had with the last government was they changed their policy at the 11th hour in terms of pay awards. And when the pay award was made to the NHS, and coming back to, I think, what colleagues have spoken about earlier today, the fact that the NHS is this amorphous beast that has a great deal of social enterprise delivery within it, which perhaps isn't recognised immediately. And we were able to push for parity in terms of that award for social enterprises delivering. And I think the award ended up being something in the region of £50 million to the social enterprises who were operating in that space and were totally viable recipients of that award for their work. I think it's very fair to say, to echo some of Patrick's messaging, we're finding it difficult still, and frustratingly so, because you would think in a country where the aspiration is growth, it would also be for good growth, better growth, growth where actually it really impacts the communities. And getting that message through seems to be a little harder than it might need to be. We've also seen, I think, the effects of some disincentives. So it was mentioned earlier that the incentive for employee ownership had been withdrawn. And we've also noticed that UKRI, which funded businesses and social enterprise, are a perfectly legitimate vehicle which can sign up to that, have been involved. We're now hearing that people are being told that if they are a business that returns the majority of its profits to continue to do what it does, they cannot be the recipient of the funding. And so we're currently looking into that. I'd like to end on a more positive note, if I may. And I'm happy to say that very recently we've been having some conversations with the Department for Education. And again, quite a historic publication, but back in 2012, we wrote a document called The Shadow State, which warned of the privatisation of public services and the effects that that could bring. And actually, the Department for Education are now experiencing that real time in the issues that they have around looked after children, and the private equity, largely investments within their arena, which are now creating 35% margins off of the back of the most vulnerable within society. And we are talking to them about other options and social enterprise models where actually they would take on some of those roles, where they would be very happy with a much more modest profit and the impact outcomes of working and returning profits to help those young people that are in care. So there are definitely conversations going on. And sorry, Glenys, I'm probably over.
No. I'm completely, as you know, I've been slightly obsessed with the looked after children and profit gouging. We have a bill going through through Parliament at the moment, which is about children's well-being and education in schools, and I think it needs to be strengthened to allow those things to happen. At the moment, it's permissive in that it will allow local authorities to work together to do their procurement and commissioning of the services for looked after children, particularly the most vulnerable and therefore the most expensive to look after. And it's permissive. And I think it shouldn't be permissive. I think they should be. We might need to change a may to a must, so that this has to happen. But that's one of the things we're on now. What we're going to do now, and I have asked Emily and her colleagues if we can take questions verbally, because I've got a couple of questions in the question and answer box which we can look at. But actually, I think it would be quite nice to hear some voices from some of the people that we have attending this webinar, some of whom will be very familiar to you. So I'm asking Emily and her colleagues to guide me in what happens now. But whilst they're doing that, we have two questions. One from Juliet Cornford. Hi, Juliet. Nice to you. I'm glad you're with us. With Patrick talking about Pride of Place Fund, potential for very local financial exclusion and deprivation issues, feel potential here for social enterprises. I think that's exactly right. And what, Patrick, you're being asked to expand on where we see the potential for this fund. I think that would be, I'd be happy to hear your answer on that, but I actually also think that that this is absolutely a job for Social Enterprise UK, because actually we need to, it seems to me that one of the things we have to do, and you're probably already on this, is work out how you can make sure that local organizations know how to use the Pride of Place Fund, that local social enterprises know how. So we should be using our own networks to be able to do that. It's kind of, seems to me to be the no-brainer there. Okay, do you want to have a little go at that, Patrick?
Yeah, no problem at all, by all means.
Welcome back.
Thanks. Yeah, that's the nature of Parliament. Sometimes you need to nip off and do something else halfway through a meeting. It's just the way it is. So the Pride in Place programme it's reminiscent in my mind to the old programme that Local Trust ran, where communities were given a pot of money to decide how they spent it, how they would spend it according to their own priorities. Most of the areas that have been chosen have been told this is a long-term fund over 10 years, and there is a guarantee of £2 million per year for 10 years for these very localised areas. To ensure good governance, there are oversight committees and governance arrangements being put in place with the assistance and with the direction of the MPs for those constituencies and the local authorities. But how that money then gets spent is very much on this localized basis, and this kind of double devolution down to local authorities and MPs, and then down again to the communities and local groups. And so there isn't this one size fits all approach of how social enterprises on the ground and from the grassroots can get involved. There may be a mapping exercise that maybe Social Enterprise UK could do to say any Pride in Place recipient communities that overlap with the geographical areas of interest of social enterprises, that there may be a job to do to put them in touch with each other, or to at least say, if your local priority is designing out crime in an estate, is there an SE that can help you with that? Or if your local priority is to renovate an old kind of municipal tip and put it in to turn it into a park, is there a social enterprise that can do that? But those priorities in those areas of what people would actually want to do, you're looking at 100, 200, 300 maybe communities all making those individual autonomous decisions themselves. And I think that it's going to be difficult to have this one size fits all top down approach from national organizations. And I think maybe the best that can be done is identify those areas, put social enterprises who work in those geographic areas in touch with the committees, and say, have a meeting, discuss what you can offer. And you never know that there is money available. There are good people doing good work. But I just think because of the nature and the grassroots and the bottom up approach, it's going to be difficult, I think, to have a coordinated level of engagement there.
I think that's probably true. How have we learned the lessons about what's happened in Wales, do you think, with this? I mean, I'm asking Bethan possibly, because it seems to me that colleagues in Wales have been doing something like this for quite some time. I mean, am I misunderstanding what Pride Place is about?
In terms of what, sorry, remind me.
Well, it's about basically giving pots of money to communities to spend on the things that they have decided are the priorities in those communities.
There hasn't been a programme like that for some time in Wales now. There was the Communities First programme some time ago, which, hasn't been replaced. I mean, I'm new there's not been a community investment programme in Wales since I've been part of Compass. The funding we get now is largely national programmes that anybody can access, or we've been part of the delivery of the SPF programme. But that's been a little bit, as Patrick describes, a bit of a patchwork, in not necessarily, it's been really powerful where we've had it, despite a lot of challenges with the logistics of it and the timing and things, but it hasn't been a consistent approach across local authority areas because of that devolution. So it's finding the balance. I think we've had more devolution in other areas, I suppose, of power locally through various programmes. And it's finding that balance, I think, isn't it, between having enough consistency and coordination that you're driving enough impact forward across the nation, balanced against the local determination of need. And I think for me, it feels like there needs to be some sort of, almost, I was thinking earlier about some sort of social enterprise budgeting tool, in the same way that there is now gender budgeting and equalities assessments. Should we, in all of those pride of places, if there was a guideline that said to everybody, if there is a social enterprise or a community group that can do this, they should be the first to get the opportunity, then that would almost give, then what it is and how they do it is then very locally determined. But I think to embed the principle of a community and social enterprise approach is almost the golden thread that needs to be placed through.
Each of the different nations seemed to have, over the last few years, got 10-year plans or strategies, And we don't have one in England, do we? We don't have one. So I'm just wondering, arising out of this, and I should be asking my colleagues is whether actually we need to say we do need a 10-year plan. I don't know what colleagues from Scotland and Northern Ireland. Yes,
Yeah.
Colin.
Yeah, you're not on your own there. We don't have a strategic plan either. Something we've talked about for a while, and we tend to be 1 year as the way, multi-year funding is something that's only starting to come through, but we don't have such a thing as a strategic plan or policy for Northern Ireland. It's just something that part of the work programme, I suppose, that we manage. Just going back to that people in place thing, we don't have anything such as that in Northern Ireland. But I mentioned earlier the Social Economy Action Group, and one of the things that's come out of the action plan that the minister brought forward was a social enterprise growth fund, and that's that they're exploring the potential for dedicated capital loan scheme for social enterprises dedicated to growth and focused on those organisations for whom existing market offerings do not meet their needs. So we're doing a bit of work with the NI to sort of prizes out there at the moment. That's like a one-stop shop type thing, I suppose, is what we're talking about. But it's part of the action plan, but it's not, doesn't call people in place, but it's similar, I suppose.
What do you think, Duncan?
Yeah, I think that point about a 10-year strategy and plan, I think, is really important. So it's definitely had a big impact on the social enterprise movement in Scotland. I would say if you are thinking, I would say every part of the UK needs one of those. I would say if you're thinking about doing it, make sure there's a long consultation process and it's very much led by the sector, which is what we did. So it's not the government saying this is what needs to happen to the sector. It's sector organisations, grassroots social enterprises saying this is what we want and need for the next 10 years. I think that's the way to do it. So I think when we created ours, obviously a while ago now, there was that quite long consultation process, and not just with social enterprises, but with public sector partners as well, asking enterprise agencies, those kind of people, about what they need to see in that strategy. So obviously at some point we'll do some kind of review of that, and then look at what comes next as well. But as I mentioned, we have this IDBM context now, this inclusive democratic business models context. It's more than social enterprise now. So we have to work within that new context as well, which would be quite interesting, I think, next year. Obviously, we've got an election, and then neatly the strategy is coming to an end as we have an election kind of thing. So I think there's a good opportunity there to really learn from what's happened already. But I would certainly say, yeah, a 10-year strategy for the UK would be great, and for obviously other parts of the UK as well.
Yeah, I think that's right. We have got a question from an anonymous attendee. I didn't know that we had such things. What do the panel think about the recent drive to remove social value requirement from contracts and go back to price and quality? Apparently, this was recently backed by a Labour MP. I would like to know who that is, please. A report in the Times. So it seems to me that everybody, I think virtually everybody, has mentioned the importance of social value and developing social value and making it mandatory and all of those things. So I'm not sure I need to ask the whole panel what they think about that, unless anybody wants to intervene on this. I don't know if you've got anything to say, Andrew.
No, I just think it's a self-evident result. I think where they've been included and the results speak for themselves, where you are able to purchase with your commissioning not just the service that you want, but also additional benefits within society. And it would just be ludicrous to not have that as a mechanism to ensure that you get that best value for per pound.
Yeah, I think that's right. Well, I wondered if there's any of our colleagues who are watching this want to actually put the question themselves rather than writing it in the box. I think I'm looking for Emily to tell me how that. Go on, Emily. Is that possible?
Yes, absolutely possible. I think someone's just popped their hand up. So
Yes, they have. Who is that?
I can't see. Jess, are you able to help there?
Oh, Peter.
There we
Yes,
go.
come on, Peter, join in. Hello, Peter Bundy from Better.
Hello, Gladys.
Hi.
Thank you very much for your time. There was a couple of things around procurement that we've all been struggling with, and I commend Stuart's point in Northern Ireland that it's not just a legal duty to bring social enterprises to procurement, but he's looking for a legal duty to support organisations to deliver that. So what we're finding is there's social value acts, there's great commitment from government, central government, to get social procurement into the public sector, but we know that the mechanisms of procurement, the evaluations, are making a mockery of social value metrics. So, recent example, we had a 50% price, 50% quality and social value tender where we scored 100% social value. The winning private company got 4%. Now, in most tenders, you'd be thrown out with that sort of score. We were better on quality, better on deliverability, and yet we lost it on £100,000 of price. So it was clear, we knew from the mechanism that it was virtually a lost cause. So it is about how we bring in mechanics to underpin at the gatekeepers, which is local government, social central government policy and ambition. And then the second one is that it's part of the unforeseen intention, I think, of local government reorganisation is that we're having to support a number of smaller social enterprises to even be able to bid for their existing work, because the scale of the work now becomes 3 or 4 authorities instead of one, and they're failing the financial evaluation criteria even to get on the tender list. So just 2 things there, Glenys, from experience.
I think that's really helpful. Peter Bundy is the Chief Executive of Better, who are the suppliers of leisure services. I think most of you will know that, but just in case anybody wasn't sure, and operate, I think, across the whole of the UK. They supply wonderful swimming pools, gyms and libraries in Camden, where I live. Thank you very much.
They're also operating an academy to support other social enterprises. So
yes.
And now a scaled organisation which is really investing in our own community.
Anybody else in the audience who wants to put a question personally on that? So I'll make a comment, because I think that was a very helpful bit of our conversation today. No, well, what we have also here is the question I think I want to pose now we're getting towards the end of this, is it seems to me that there's been a commonality of purpose across the 4 nations. And we're all working in different kinds of ways, but to the same purpose. And so the question I think probably is, what do we do next together, really? How can we learn from each other, but also whether or not there are some things that we should be asking together in terms of what might happen across the whole of the UK. So I suppose that's really, I think, in our final few minutes, is the question I'm going to put to the panel about what they think the things are that we should be focusing on, the biggest opportunities and the biggest challenges that we've got. And I know money is one of those, but there are other things like the procurement issues and the wins that some of us have had, and things like pride of place, those sorts of things. So really, shall I start with Duncan?
Yeah, I suppose
I have to pick on somebody, sorry.
No, that's fine. It's all good, don't worry. It's all good. I suppose a really practical thing is really getting civil servants from different parts of the UK to speak to each other. Obviously, they do to a certain extent. Obviously, I know that happens, but I think in terms of social enterprise development and the things we're talking about here today, if they get the civil servants together, sorry, I'm sure sort of Scottish government civil servants are here at the moment. I'm sure they speak to colleagues already, but just making that a bit more formal maybe as well. But also the politicians as well, getting politicians from other parts of the UK speaking specifically around the social economy and social enterprise. I think that would be just quite a practical thing, to be honest, as well, just getting that communication kind of built up as well. So I don't want to put any Scottish government colleagues on the spot there, but certainly ministerial level as well as civil service level. And again, that's something organisations like us could help facilitate as well, and just help with that process.
I think that's a really, really good suggestion. Bethan, what do you think?
Well, as we do meet as a 4 nations group actually, so lots of nods around the table, and we are thinking actively. We usually come together, share best practice and learning and the challenges, but we are thinking more and more about the things we can do together, including what the key asks might be. So that's work in progress. But I think one of the challenges at the moment is the very divisive nature of some narratives that are fracturing communities that are struggling and where outcomes are not great. So I think we putting our heads together to create a vision for a different way the economy could work that does speak to people and engages them, because there are other narratives perhaps more powerful that are kind of gaining traction. And I think just how we can safely and in an appropriate way put our heads together around a narrative and a vision where we see social enterprise and community ownership of wealth and services and assets as a key part of a different way forward feels really important, as well as obviously the policy and influencing and coming together around joint asks for governments and civil servants. I think there is a public facing narrative that's needed as well.
Yeah, I think that's right. Colin.
Yeah, just to reiterate what Bethany was saying there, we do work well as home nations, and we do meet regularly to quarterly, hopefully quarterly in person as well. So that's established, and I suppose maybe the next step down for that is our membership base and those social enterprises in each. How do we introduce social enterprises in Northern Ireland, social enterprises in Scotland, Wales, and across in England? I think the big game changer for the sector overall will be an increase in public awareness, if we can drive that somehow amongst the four home nations. That we talk a lot about partnerships, social partnerships, bringing on private sector and public sector and educational bodies. But if the man on the street was more aware of what he was doing by purchasing from a social enterprise and how he was helping the community, I think that would be a game changer for us. On the political front, I think we're also engrossed on lobbying our own devolved nation. But maybe there is something that we come together and we all go to Westminster just as UK bodies and try to get it more on the agenda. But I know SEUK are doing great work in that respect. But sometimes think and we certainly have MPs at Westminster that some of them would be very supportive of our work too. So maybe there is an angle there that we can work closer.
Okay, thank you. Patrick and Andrew, which of you wants to have a... Go on, Patrick.
I think what I'll do is actually there is an unanswered question that was directed to me, which I'll pick up if that's okay. And that's around social enterprise support and it being coterminous with other kind of agencies of the states, local authorities, strategic authorities, and whether there is space for the social enterprise, almost the development agencies for the sector to be brought to being. And I think there's a real opportunity, maybe not on a statutory basis, but I think there is an opportunity that the new mayor-led strategic authorities across the country should have a power embedded within them to promote and to fund the development of social enterprise. We are missing a trick here. When the last large-scale local government reorganisation took place in the 70s, the CVS movement was organised along the same boundaries. And I think that with the coming devolution bill and the issues around the boundaries and the borders and the powers to these new strategic authorities, I think that there is an opportunity here to make sure that there are people with the power and the intention and the wherewithal to get social enterprise on the agenda of those new mayors.
And we certainly saw it when we've been in Manchester, the commitment in Manchester to be organised and to, the powers that the mayor and the mayors, there's more than one mayor up in the Manchester region actually, and the way that they have developed policies which support social businesses in their areas is actually been very important indeed. I am just reminded by our question and answer boxes that Gareth from PSEN says, we have a social enterprise strategy for our city of Plymouth. It was modelled on the excellent Scottish strategy And Luke's presentation about Wales was excellent. I think that's true. Fully support the need for locally grown strategies and a wider UK strategy, or for England, learning from the devolved nations who've been doing groundbreaking work. Absolutely. I think that's exactly right. Duncan is saying to everybody, we should also mention mutual learning from mainland Europe and globally too. I think that's also true. I wasn't able to attend the World Forum, either virtually and certainly not going there this year, but I have attended them and over years. And every time you do that, you learn something new about what other nations are doing and what we need to think about. So I think, unless there's anything else anybody wants to say, unless you want to add anything, Andrew, to what's been said.
No, I think I would agree with everything. I think learning from Europe is very possible, and the Basque Country were mentioned earlier by colleagues, but Mondragon are a shining example of how you can really create economic value through a social enterprise that can ride out the cyclicality of certain industries and also economic peaks and troughs, and they're the kind of things that we really ought to be focusing on going forward.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think what we've done in the last hour and a half is that we've heard about your flagship legislation across the nations, which I think, I mean, I've learned some new things, and I found that incredibly valuable. And we're also learned, I think, from each other about the gap that there is between legislation, policy, and action, because almost all of you have mentioned the need for implementation, effective implementation of the policies that our various governments and legislative authorities have chosen. So that's absolutely one of the issues that challenges that we all of us face. However, I think what we also know, and I would say thank you to everybody for taking part in this. Our audience has been, I think it was 60 at its maximum, which is actually, I think, rather nice and a rather good, rather large number. I'd like to thank everybody who's participated in this and joined in with it. I am feeling very optimistic as a result of the work that we've done, and the work that you are all doing. And I hope that at some point in the next new period, we will be able to use the things we've learned from each other to make the work that we do in promoting social enterprise more effective. So I'm going to say goodbye to all of you and thank you very much indeed. And I hope we'll all meet again fairly soon, and we might even see each other in person. You never know. Okay, so thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.